When last we spoke, 2 weeks ago, we did a message titled, "It's All Jesus." You remember that one? And how you're all complete because of Jesus and not because of anything that you have done. We're going to continue this same train of thought. Paul, as I told you, is addressing two false teachings that came into the church at Colossians, where we're going to be in chapter 2. And that is the teaching of Gnosticism, which we covered a little bit. And this week we're going to look at the false teaching of, some people would call it Judaism, some people would call it legalism. And of course that's not a problem here, right? We don't have to worry about those things. Well, it's amazing how these things, they're like a little spider sometimes that gets in where you have no idea, and then you look up and you see a little web there. They creep in secret ways. So we're going to start reading in chapter 2, verse 11 is where we are. Now, just so that you all know, next time you come up here and preach a sermon, make sure and get with Megan before church so that she has an idea of what you're going to do. Because I just threw Megan under the bus.
This one?
So no hurry, Megan. No hurry at all. Hey, looky there. Looky there. All right. Thank you, Megan. Okay, verse 11. Now, you know what? Let me back up. Can I? Yes, I can. You're good, Megan. Let's just go to verse 9. Let's just start on verse 9 because that's where that is, and that'll bring us right in. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. In him, that's Jesus. And this is where we landed 2 weeks ago, and I loved spending most of the time on this verse right here. And you are complete in him who is the head over all principality and power. Now verse 11. In him, and we're seeing that a lot. You remember we talked about that being covenant language. Now we're going to get into, as if we haven't already, but another section of our benefit of entering into covenant with our God, where he does everything and we just show up. Verse 11. In him you were also circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. Now, I want to stop right there because Paul is taking this opportunity to talk about Judaism, not only to the Jewish Christians, but also to the Greek Christians. And let me just remind us briefly of a very prominent thing that was coming into the church, and that was, you want to be a Christian, yes, Jesus is the Messiah, that's all good. Oh, by the way, don't forget, men, go get circumcised. If you haven't been, right over here in the side room right after service. That was some of that type of thing was coming into the church. They were bringing in the Jewish culture, the Jewish customs, even commandments from the law of Moses, and saying, yes, Jesus is Messiah, but you also have to do this. Those kind of things don't happen around here anymore. But since it's in the Bible right now, we'll just go ahead and keep talking about it. He talks about circumcision and baptism here. So he's talking to people with backgrounds, Jewish culture and the Gentile culture. And it says that the circumcision, you've been circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. So they're very familiar with the idea of circumcision. may be less familiar with the idea of a circumcision made without hands. So I ask the question, what type of a circumcision is one made without hands? Is that a physical circumcision? No. What he's talking about is something spiritual. A spiritual circumcision. A putting off of the flesh, denying ourselves, putting to death those parts of us that are contrary to God's character, and living a new way, which is more in line with the Spirit and the way that God would want us to behave. He talks about a baptism. Is it a spiritual baptism or a physical baptism? Buried with him in baptism, in which you are also raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. So again, here, Paul is taking the spiritual look at these things, because these things are coming in and being taught as a physical, ritualistic thing that you have to do. And Paul's going, no. Look, we've spent over 2 chapters talking about how it's all Jesus. It's all Jesus. Jesus has done all this. And now, when these people come in and say, well, yeah, it's all Jesus, but Paul is telling his sheep, don't buy that. Don't give in to that, because that's false. That's false. Verse 13, and you, being dead in your trespasses, and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses. Verse 14, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us. First of all, you're dead in your trespasses, but he has made you alive with his Son and forgiven all trespasses. He has done that. And now it says, having removed the handwriting of requirements that was against us. He's removed it and nailed it to the cross. And where does your mind go? I'll tell you where my mind went. The handwriting of requirements. Well, that's talking about the law of Moses. And Jesus has removed that. May I tell you that is not what is being said here. Handwriting of requirements. Handwriting is a word that could also, and for our purposes maybe more accurately, be translated certificate of debt. In fact, it could also be read the certificate of debt with its requirements he has removed and has nailed it to the cross. So the law, we look at the law, and everybody's always talking about, well, Jesus fulfilled the law, we're no longer under the law. The law doesn't pertain to us anymore, so I can go covet. Right? I can go covet, I can do these things that, yes, I know, 10 commandments, not the law, thou shalt not covet, but these things that were in the law, now I can go do them, because the law doesn't pertain to us anymore. And that is not the case. He's talking about he's removed the certificate of debt with its requirements. And here's what Paul is saying, that Jesus has done. And we've heard this 100 times in 100 different ways, and here's one more. The list of charges that could be written down against you, you bunch of dirty, rotten scoundrels, for all the bad things you have done, that list of charges has been wiped out, taken away, because of what Jesus has done. And we'll see the direct correlation to where Paul's going with this here in a minute. But it's been removed. It's been nailed to the cross. It's been wiped away. And do you know that there's even a little hidden gem in that term, wiped away, removed? One of the things that I get to do, sometimes 3 times a week and sometimes once every 3 months. But in my job, I have the pleasure of what we call graffiti removal. I don't know if any of you have ever had that pleasure, but sometimes it happens a lot, and sometimes they give you a little break. But somebody will come with their spray can, put something on the side of a building or on a wall, and then I get to come along behind with my bucket of paint, my roller, and I get to paint that out. That's the idea behind wiped away. It's been completely removed. Well, you say, no, it's not removed. It's still underneath that layer of paint that you put on. Let's put it this way. No one is any longer able to read it. How about that? No one can read it anymore because Jesus has dealt with it. He's taken it away, and we're going somewhere, so stay with me. Having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having wiped out, that can also, now picture when they built the temple, and the walls were overlaid with gold. It's the same idea. He's wiped it away, whitewashed it. He has, I wrote it down good right here. Let me just read it. He's made it so that these charges can never be read against you. That's what he's done. And we've said that 100 times in 100 different ways, and we'll do it 1,000 more because Jesus is all over this, and that's how simple the gospel is. And that is our good news that we live by. Verse 15, and we're going to land here in something that we really need to think about here in a minute. Verse 15, having disarmed principalities and powers, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. Now, by wiping away the handwriting of requirements, taking it away, nailing it to the cross, he has disarmed principalities and powers. Now remember what that is. That's the demonic in the spiritual realm. And he has disarmed them. They are no longer able to use these charges, these accusations against us. So if you're like me and a thought pops into my head of something that I have done in my past, and I go, oh, that was horrible that I did that, and I hadn't thought about that in a long time, and I don't know why this remembrance of it just popped up in my head, but I wish it hadn't. All I have to do is remember, no, Jesus has wiped all this stuff away. He has dealt with my sin, and he has dealt with my shame, and I don't need to feel this guilt and this shame over this again. So I need to make my thought process go from I'm so ashamed to Jesus, you are so amazing that you have taken this away, that you love me so much that anytime I feel shame, I can turn that into gratitude to you for what you have done. Because he doesn't look at me with shame. Jesus doesn't look at you with shame. God doesn't look at you with shame. God looks at you with love because you're complete. You're perfect. Because of Jesus. It all goes back to Jesus. It's all always about Jesus. It's a simple, simple thing that we just get lost in sometimes, that try to make it complicated. We try to make it complicated. So he has disarmed principalities and powers, and what this does is this takes away Satan's ability to tear us down, convince us that we are unworthy, rejected, and unloved by our Father. Okay, so now, let that pump you up. I want to pump you up. You know, remember that old... Okay. Some of you are looking at me. This guy needed to prepare more. Let that pump you up, because now Paul's going to give a warning. Okay? Again, we're talking about legalism. We're talking about the Judaizers coming in and trying to pollute the goodness of the gospel. So after all that, Paul says, "So let no one judge you in food or drink, regarding a festival or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ." So where does your mind go? My mind goes to, okay, let nobody judge you in these things that the law said that the Jewish nation was supposed to do. And because Tim did such a great job teaching through this stuff with us, all we have to do is mention it and we know what we're talking about. The Feast of Tabernacles, okay? The Feast of Passover, all of the sacrifices that were to be made, observances of new moons, observances of the Sabbath. Because you think about let's take the Sabbath, for example, what that turned into. If the Sabbath is a shadow of things to come, like this says, why did it turn into such a burden? Remember, Jesus did miracles to help people on the Sabbath, and the religious leaders went, blasphemy. This guy cannot be from God. Who would help someone on the Sabbath? That's not what the Sabbath is for. When originally, what was it supposed to be? It was supposed to be a weekly reminder to the Jewish nation of the rest that we have in Jesus every day. It was a shadow, but the substance, or the body, is in Jesus. What about food and drink? There were things that you were supposed to eat and things you weren't supposed to eat. Do you think there might have been Judaizers coming to these Gentile Christians saying, "Oh, you eat pork? How could you eat pork?" Does eating pork or not eating pork make you closer to Jesus? No. No, but it was a tradition. And a lot of times these types of things come under the label of religion. Okay? Jesus wasn't a big fan of religion. Religion has more to do with rules and regulations put over people by people than it does to do with how can we get closer to Jesus. Okay, so stay with me. So we talked about Sabbath, we talked about new moons. You know, by the way, Tim, and you may not even know this, as long as y'all know Tim McKee, thank God for Judy, or who knows what he would be up to these days. But as long as y'all know Tim McKee, did you know that he observed the Sabbath and that he did not eat pork? Some of you are going, yes, yes, yes. Now, let me ask you this. Did Tim ever push that on anybody? Because here's the area I want to get into. See that no one judges you on food or drink or observing the Sabbath, because that was all a shadow, but the substance is in Jesus. If you want to do that, great. Great. I think I know Tim well enough to know that the reason he did those things is because he loved God. Because he loved God. Those things, and I'm sure many more that maybe none of us know about. But it's just his life was motivated by his love and devotion to God. So he chose. He chose. He says, God probably knew what he was talking about. There's probably something about pork. Maybe it's not healthy. I don't know. But, I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat it. I believe God, what he said when he told the Jewish nation not to eat it, whatever his reasons are. Now, he did observe the Sabbath, but some of you may remember back years ago at this building, he was here at work parties on the Sabbath. So how do you reconcile that? You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, but he was here working on the Sabbath. Well, here's what he told me. He says, here's what I have to tell myself. He said, Wayne Campbell and Wayne Williams, Gail Carr and Al Haas, Corey Lee, and if any of y'all others were here during those days when work was being done, Tim said, I have to think of them as my oxen. Because the Bible does say that on the Sabbath, if one of your oxen falls into a ditch, you can get it out. So Tim says, I have to be here in case one of my oxen falls into a ditch. But you see, my point is, he did that out of his love and devotion to God. He didn't do that as being directed in a legalistic way and imposing those same beliefs on you. Okay? So, we don't judge regarding food and drink and Sabbaths and these things, and my mind goes straight to, well, right, you can't judge anybody who doesn't do that. Okay? Because Jesus fulfilled all that, and now we're under grace, and we live through faith. And those things were a picture of the substance that was to come. But let me also say, is the other way true? Should we also not judge those people who do that? And that's why I wanted to use Tim as an example. And so let me throw out another example here. The church right next door. We've all seen how their women dress over there. And as many people are in here, there might be that many different thoughts that go through your head when we go, I wonder why they do that. I'll tell you the thought that I had. Well, two. I wonder why they make their women dress that way, and I wonder why the women put up with it. Okay? So I've just made a judgment. And it's not word for word what we're talking about right here, but it's the same thing. I made a judgment that what they're doing is legalistic. And why would those women put up with that? You see what I'm saying? You see the little spider that crept into me, and all of a sudden there's a web, and I don't know how it got there? We all deal with these sorts of things. Now, I've never gone over there to talk to them about that. For all I know, they do that because they love God. And there's something about that for them that is an expression of their devotion and their love for God. And that's why they do it. they might say, no, this doesn't make us any closer to Jesus. We do this because we love him, and this is a way for us to show our devotion to him. Okay, so there's always two sides. And then I had this thought. That church next door, I wonder if there's ever a guy over there going, you know, the church next door? Okay, think about that. You know, it's easy for us to think, but do they, oh, wow, okay, comes full circle. Okay, we're not supposed to do that. Don't judge that. What if, I'm almost done. The best stuff is always on the last page, so let me turn the page to my notes. What if we came into church one Sunday and there were no communion cups? Where would that take your brain? Walk in, grab, there's no communion cup. Is church going to count today? Or are you going to go, oh, okay, well, I guess we won't have communion today. Or are you going to go, somebody better do something because this can't happen? There's nothing wrong with either one of those viewpoints. But these are the kinds of things that I want us as a family here to be mindful of and to be thinking of. If the one person says, oh, well, I guess we won't have communion today, and the other person says, how can you feel that way? How can you feel that way? That just shows that you're not very spiritual. Okay? And then the other person walks up and the person says, there's no communion cup. Somebody has to do something. Somebody needs to go to the store. And hey, what's the big deal? Calm down. Don't be so legalistic. You know, it goes both ways. And as I said before, at other messages that get to this point, ain't it just like God to do things in such a way to really cause us to have to love each other? To cause us to have to show grace to each other, forgiveness. You know what's a hard thing to do is to not to take things personally. That's a hard thing to do. I have hurt one of my best friend's feelings because he misunderstood something that I did and he took it personally, and it caused a rip between us. These things, it doesn't matter how well you know somebody. These things are just things that I want us to be mindful of. This is where the text has taken us. So it's one thing to be judgmental in religious ritual type things, but it creeps into almost every aspect of our lives in very tiny, secret ways, and it can cause tear and separation between us. We're not going to agree on everything. And thank goodness, because some of y'all got some crazy ideas. I have some crazy ideas, and it would be best for you not to agree with them. We all have those. Let me read one more section, and we will finish. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, And I didn't talk about all those things, and that's okay, because this is the part right here. And not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body is nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the increase that is from God. And it takes us right back to the title of the last message. It's all Jesus. It's all Jesus. Whenever these things happen, if we're not looking to the head, right? If we're not looking to our King, our Creator, and the one, because of Him, is the whole reason that we're even here, then we're drifting away from each other. If we're all looking towards our head, if we're all looking towards Jesus through whatever comes up,
Amen.
we get closer together, right? We get closer together because we have that common bond. John, you can go ahead and come up here. Thank you for letting me tell you that, because this is like, I don't know, it's just kind of like family maintenance. You know, these things are gonna happen. We've experienced them in the past, and we'll experience them again. You know why? Because we're all here. There was a guy who said, I tried to get away from my problems, but I realized that wherever I go, there I am. And we're all here, so these things are going to happen. If you have any prayer requests or any needs that you want to make known, you can do that while John leads us in this song.